whether it obstructs the democratic process, which I'm going to argue it is. And there's a famous quote in political science. The flaw in the pluralist heaven is that the heavenly chorus sings with a strong upper class accent. And I think what that means is that there are lobbyists working for both sides, but you're going to find far more lobbyists arguing for big pharma executives or people on Wall Street than there are going to be for the single mother who's working retail part-time. So I was wondering, is that an issue, the disparity in representation of lobbying?
If you are with a group of some means, trade association, what have you, you do have an edge, but it's not just the business community. You've got the gun lobby, it's really big. I work for two of the largest and most powerful citizens group. One was a taxpayer group, the other one was a religious group. And I was the big dog in town. So even citizens, well organized, can have a major voice. But you take a look at, for instance, trade policy. Almost all the lobbying is on the side of corporations who want free trade. There's not a lot of organized voice for those who want protectionism. So it's going to depend on the issue. This is where I get to it's the best we can do. You know, I don't think you can legislate this perfect system. And you're going to have, you know, anomalies, whether you think Big Pharma and their issues are bad, they could be easily to blame. They're a more powerful lobby than the other side. So you have, for instance, sugar subsidies in Florida. There are 5 sugarcane growers in Florida, billionaires, who have supported sugar subsidies for decades. And they're just really good at what they do in lobbying. So, you know, it's a little bit analogous to the legal system in that both sides have counsel. Some are more effective than others. There's kind of a rough justice to that with what the judge decides or what the jury decides. It ain't perfect. And if you've got a better legal team, you're more likely to win. You got a better lobbying team, you're more likely to win. But I don't know what the alternative is. I don't know how to equalize everything. And getting rid of it leaves the poor guy like my client with the massage therapy high and dry, or anybody high and dry, whether you're a farmer or anybody else. I mean, everybody deserves a voice, and you know, there's got to be, over time, this sorts itself out. But sometimes time is decades, you know. But eventually, the people's voice is going to be heard. That's the best I can give you. I wish it was better. Yes.
Do you find, like, on a more logistical, practical basis, that you're lobbying specific congressmen or blocks of congressmen? Do you target coalitions, or is it just, here's a guy we have in mind for a specific piece of legislation?
Every issue is different. You have a certain network of relationships, but committee assignments are really important. Whoever you're representing, their congressional delegation is important. And lobbyists do this all the time, but legislators do it too. You see all the acrimony on C-SPAN. People are pounding their fist on the table and shouting and screaming. It's not like the British House of Commons, but it's really, you adopt the attitude that today's enemy may be tomorrow's ally. So you try not to burn a bridge. There's a few that do, but you try not to burn a bridge because you never know when you're going to be with them on the next one.
If lobbies aren't using unethical means, then how is it that some lobbies and lobbyists can be so much more successful than others? For example, why is it that the gun lobby is so extremely successful in America? Especially considering the fact that a lot of the positions they advocate for, a majority of the American public disagrees with. So how do they manage to become so successful with?
Well, I think actually, it's not my issue, but I think public opinion polling reflects support for their position.
Well, something specific like a universal background check.
Yeah, I know. There's a lot of issues, but I think taking this very broad brush here, and I may be wrong on this, but my impression of public opinion polling is that it is, people should have the right to own a firearm and use it for either, their own personal safety or for sport. But having said that, The power of that particular group comes from a very passionate core of supporters, grassroots. If you feel passionate about something, you'll contribute money to it. You'll be active when they say it's time to, contact your congressman, show up at the town hall meeting. They do. I had this congressman tell me the story. He's from Ohio, a suburban district, and he was visiting a friend of his to be a guest speaker in his congressional district in some rural area. I don't know if it was Kentucky or where. And so he's going down this dirt road, and he's pulling into the, this auditorium. It was, I think, a church or something. We're going to give a talk in the basement. This guy literally walks out of the woods with no shoes. And he says, I'm a member of the NRA. I understand that you're going to hear to talk for Congressman so-and-so. I want to shake your hand and say, good for you for voting the right way. I mean, that's power, baby. I mean, that is grassroots. That's a very extreme example, but it's a true story. So, passion counts for power. Raw numbers count for power. It doesn't mean that, again, I just don't think there's any way to equal it out so that you base decisions based on, your just, impression of what the right thing to do is. You've got competing interests over here, you've got competing interests over there, and that's rough justice.
We probably have time for 2 more questions.
Okay.
What are the differences in lobbying between the executive branch versus Congress? What do you find?
Entirely different. With the executive branch, you have a complex series of decision-making. Usually, lobbying is done about regulations. And there's a very circuitous thing to navigate through. But what I do is this is one of my specialties, I utilize Congress's oversight of the executive branch for them to make the case. So I'll go to, some committee of jurisdiction over such and such a department. Questions are raised in a hearing, there's a letter sent to the agency. That's often the most effective way is go through others. Yes, last one.
When you're on the other side of it and you're listening to lobbyists, to what degree do they actually influence your opinion and the congressman that you're working towards opinion?
Well, lobbyists often are very nice people to deal with. They're friendly. My wife used to sell law books to law firms, and she did it in Washington, in Chicago where we lived, and we moved to Washington, and she continued the company selling to law firms in Washington. After about a month, she said, Brian, I don't know what this is, but the lawyers in Chicago are jerks, and the one in Washington, they're nice. So why is that? I said, very simple. You've been talking to litigators who are in Chicago who are paid to be jerks, and lobbyists are paid to be nice. That's kind of a simplistic way to look at it, but so there's the nice factor, and you appreciate that, but you don't base your vote on that or your opinion. What you base it on is, like I said, you're skeptical. All right, what's this guy telling me? I'm going to hear the other side as a staffer or as a legislator. I'll kind of sort through it. They represent a particular point of view. This is not like some objective lesson here. And if they're straight with you, you will be more inclined to listen to them, certainly listen to them the next time, and to maybe give a presumption that what they're going to tell you is probably something you agree with. You're never going to take that, whatever you say, I'll vote any way you want. It's like, I've dealt with this guy over time here, this woman, and they're always a straight shooter with me, and any questions I have, they answer them. And so they know my voting record, and you're more inclined to presume, subject to verification, that what they're saying is probably something you agree with.
All right, excellent. So now we're going to go ahead and open it up to discussion. If you still had some questions that you want to ask, feel free to once again pose the questions, but we also want to have you guys speak your mind and your personal opinion. And meanwhile, Jason right here is going to be writing down some points on the board, just for your memory when we get to the vote. All right, so who would like to open it up on what they think, if they agree on something particularly, if they disagree, or if you have a question, that needs some clarification, let us know. Who would like to begin? Yes?
I'll say that I agree that lobbying should be banned, just because I think that the economic costs of entering the field by paying for a lobbyist are too steep, like that, and then they block some people from presenting their voices and opinions on issues, while their voices kind of unequally represent America.
So you say for the disparity
Yeah.
between the cost of getting lobbied, that's good versus one that arguably is not that good. Response to that, yes?
Although I would agree with the fact that lobbying is a constitutional right based on the fact that it's pretty explicit that the right to petition would probably fall under some version of lobbying, and there's been a lot of legal background, and so the fact that lobbying will continue to persist legally is kind of unquestionable. I think what does present a huge problem is the fact that corporations and money will continue to be the bigger voice, and that could outshine just where pure numbers or just where passion lies. So the fact that lobbying as it stands needs to be completely reformed, I 100% agree with, but that lobbying as an entire practice will be banned or be deemed unconstitutional, I find it highly unlikely to have to change the actual wording of the right to petition.
If I may ask a follow-up question, would you say that the reforms that Mr. Lopina suggests are sufficient or more needs to be done?
I would argue that more needs to be done, because how do you account for the disparity between a corporation being able to front a certain amount of money that, like, for example, a small business owner would be able to necessarily create as much goal, so that you can hire a lobbying firm, but you won't be able to hire several lobbying firms. You won't be able to hire, significant, or people that, lobbying firms that actually accrue a certain amount of money. You won't be able to afford those companies. So there needs to be something to handle that disparity.
All right, responses or comments to that? Yes, please.
I think that ideally we would like every organization to be equally represented, for there to be this very kind of pluralistic faction society where everyone has an equal voice. But that's another one of those things, it's abstract perfection is its practical defect, and that's just an externality. When anything's put into practice, there's going to be flaws, and so yes, I think that it probably could be reformed, but to outright just ban it, I think you're just kind of living in an idealistic theory to think that that's ever going to happen.
All right, that's an excellent point. Is it really logistically possible to ban lobbying? Yes?
I definitely disagree. I don't think lobbying should be banned. Mr. Lopina just said that there are roughly 12,000 registered lobbyists, and I think we all have this vision in our minds of the Koch brothers and their cronies kind of pulling the strings in the background and influencing legislation. And while they undoubtedly have influence, 12,000 lobbyists suggests that people from a broad variety of interests and backgrounds are being represented, and their interests are being pushed for in government, not just big pharma or agriculture or whatever the hell the Koch brothers do. So you kind of have to keep that in mind. It's that not just the big guys are being represented, and while they may have a disproportional share, to just ban lobbying takes away the voice of thousands of grassroots movements.
All right. Yes, please.
Well, I'd also say that we shouldn't outright ban lobbying. I don't think that's really possible or a good idea. But I like the example before of comparing it to the legal profession, where if you have a better legal team, then you're more likely to win your case. But to extend that analogy a little bit further, in criminal law, people are still entitled to a public defender if they can't afford one. So if we were to extend that to lobbying, I would argue that not every interest even has the equivalent of a public defender, of somebody to represent them. So I do definitely think that further steps can be taken to make sure that resources are allocated to advocate for certain interest groups that don't have as much funds or can't advocate for themselves as well, to balance the playing field a bit.
Yeah, it's an interesting idea that you brought up about having maybe some kind of equivalent to the public defender system with lobbying. Any thoughts on that, or responses or
If I
comments?
can just, I
Yes,
don't want to
please.
dominate it all, just because we're having a great discussion, just chime in on a technical point. Lobbyists fall into kind of two categories. One is a paid lobbyist at a law firm or a lobby firm, which is what I do. and the other is an organized interest on the left or the right, corporate, union, environmental, what have you, that's a trade association or a professional association or some kind of citizens group, single issue group. I'll tell you, it's almost impossible to find an issue where there isn't lobbying on both sides. Often unequal, fair point. There's always some organized effort on the other side, and sometimes the little guys, are pretty darn well organized. Not always, but just that's one.
Thank you. Other comments or responses to this? Yes?
I think like most people, I agree that there are definitely benefits to lobbying, but I also think that like campaign contributions and money should be taken away from lobbying. But if that's done, I wonder what the viability of lobbying would be at that point, because I'm not sure what incentives politicians would have to meet with lobbyists, given that I know how much they really value their time, and sometimes they'll be like passionate about an issue and want to meet with somebody about it, but I still think that what drives a lot of lobbying is the money and politics. So I wonder how getting rid of the money aspect would affect lobbying.
Anyone have any comments to that or responses to that? No, well, just a show of hands. Is there someone who does think that lobbying should be entirely banned? If so, I have some follow-up questions to particular points that Ms. Lopina brought up. One of them that struck me was the fact that lobbying really does, and some arguably, open up connections and doors to people who might not have the same access to them. In the sense that government, just working through the government must be a very difficult and complicated process. A lot of times they need help and guidance in that. So does someone have a comment or response to that about the guidance that lobbying does offer? Yes?
I agree that lobbying is very natural, and I think that all of us find ourselves lobbying and being lobbied. And I think that people in Congress, the legislators, they are so busy, and it's hard for them to specialize on an issue, especially one that might be complicated, and they need people to come give them guidance and help them figure out the issues and dig deeper.
So you would agree with Ms. Lopina's point that they do offer guidance too?
Yes, and that it's impossible to get that guidance any other way.
All right. Yes?
Just to push back on that issue of guidance, well, given the fact that these bills are so long and so complex, when you have these lobbyists coming forward that already have a vested interest in mind, they could sort of spin the content of the bill in pretty much any way they see fit, because I bet they would be confident that the legislator is not actually going to read the entire bill to make sure that what they're saying is accurate. So even though they might make the legislative process move along more quickly because legislators don't have time to read the entire bills themselves and digest them, I think that they might be, in certain circumstances, be putting a certain spin on it that might not always be favorable.
Yes?
I have a question for Ms. Lopina. As someone who's been lobbying or involved with lobbying for 30-odd years, what is the effect of Citizens United been in terms of increased money or increased say? Have you found that there's been a tangible difference, before and after the Citizens United decision?
The court case?
Yeah.
Well, it's really given rise to these super PACs, which I don't think there is a lot of accountability there. Certainly you can hide the names of donors. And because it's unlimited, you can totally dominate, a discussion of something from unnamed outside interests. That's not a good recipe. So that's my own view.
Has it changed the nature of your work, or has that been relatively constant?
No, I won't say it's had a negative impact. I don't say it's been transformational.
Got it.
All right. Other points? I thought I saw a hand. Yes?
Yeah, I'd say last summer I worked for an Alzheimer's not-for-profit, and they had people going to Congress to lobby to increase funding for Alzheimer's research. I think we just fundamentally have there's a negative connotation to lobbying that we hold, and there are lobbyists for a lot of groups who would think do more positive things than others. So, it's obviously there's some conflict of interest, and some corporations have,
can afford to hire a lot more very probably educated and trained lobbyists compared to like a union of members who actually work for that corporation and can't, afford the same representation. But I mean, there is like a lot of good stuff that happens from lobbyists, and I think it just gets a bad rap because we have this bad connotation of what a lobbyist means.
Right. There definitely can be some misinterpretation, as Mr. Lopina brought up. There are a lot of ethical lobbyists out there, and unfortunately they're overshadowed by oftentimes what the media portrays. Yeah.
I just wanted to ask Mr. Lopina, how other governments around the world deal with lobbying, whether they have similar roles or they're more receptive or less receptive.
Well, first of all, we are definitely in the minority amongst democracies to have, a system with a House and a Senate bicameral system. Parliamentary democracy is more common. And we were just talking earlier about London. I did several trips to London. Had a client out there, met with some members of Parliament. And lobbying, at least in the UK, and currently in the European Union, has got a very negative connotation, and actually there's not a lot of it. And what is of it is the way lobbying used to be here, which is just, relationships that in the olden days, you had, good old Charlie, the old congressman says, hey, I got a buddy here, why don't you go talk to him? As opposed to actually knowing the issue. It was just based on relationships. So that doesn't really add much. I mean, you've got access, great, but are you really helping the process? So it is interesting. It's entirely different system in other countries.
All right, well, you guys have all been passed out the vote sheets. Just to clarify how the voting works, our main question, should lobbying be banned? If you think that it should, you agree. If you agree with Mr. Lopina's argument that it shouldn't, and that maybe there could be some possible reforms, then you want to disagree. And if you really can't make up your mind, there's always the abstain option. And once you finish voting, just go